Hello and welcome to Highlander Newsroom, a program that discusses articles and issues covered in the Highlander newspaper at UC Riverside. My name is Madison Rheins, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Highlander and your host for today. I'm joined by Kevin Contreras, the sports editor, Evelyn Homan, the opinions editor, and Brenda Jovel, the assistant radar editor. We have a few interesting topics lined up for today, so let's go ahead and get started. First up in this issue, we have an article written by contributing writer Haru Chang and assistant news editor Amaray Alvarez, who gave a student's guide on the conflict in Ukraine. They also had the opportunity to interview Paul Danieri, a UCR professor of political science and international policy, specializing in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The article mentions how ineffective sanctions on Russia will be. And how refugees are seeing a difference in treatment based on their race. Have you been keeping up with what has been happening in Ukraine? And then what do you think about the efficacy of the sanctions? Brenda?
I think it's really scary what's happening right now. And I think with our mentality, we feel like there can't be a war because we're living in such a modern age right now. It's like, oh, there's a war going on. And it's kind of unbelievable to us, but that it's escalating really quickly. And I don't know how or when the U.S. is going to get involved. But I think right now we are waiting for it to just see how it progresses. And with the sanctions, I'm not really familiar. I don't have a lot of knowledge on it, but I do hope that they help in order to stop what's going on. But with right now with Russia, they just keep going in full force into Ukraine. And it's just really scary just seeing how all of these civilians, they're dying because of this, and all of Ukraine's troops are just going down. So hopefully in the future, it turns out it just ends soon, but I don't think it is going to.
Yeah. Evelyn?
Yeah, something that's really interesting about, this war in particular is how, unlike wars, previously, social media and the access to the internet in Ukraine and just around the world, we're able to pretty much see, live what's going on, which we've never really had before in terms of, a war, which I think is why, even, no matter where you live, it's, frightening to watch because you don't want to watch, the crimes against humanity on a, large mass scale, and yet, they're populating our Twitter and Instagram feeds every day because that's just what's going on and people need to know about it. But it's kind of a double-edged sword because for as much as it's, hard to, watch these, terrible things go on, it's also, been to the benefit, I think, of Ukraine that they're able to essentially, because they're able to, show things live, what's going on social media, they're essentially able to, just counter any Russian propaganda that's oh, we had, the right to invade Ukraine because XYZ, but then you're actually seeing, that propaganda in comparison to, the live action of what's actually going on and, what people in Ukraine are facing. And I think it's incredibly interesting the role that social media is playing in this war and how it's both, helping... it's helping Ukraine and also, hurting everyone else as well because it's just so hard to watch all these things go on at once. I know I've been following it, extensively, just even though I don't know anyone in Ukraine outside of, I have a friend who has, an aunt in Ukraine. So I've been worried, for her family, but just, me, myself, in America, it's nice to know, you're safe, but it's also hard to watch because everyone has their own opinions on how the situation could go or, what we should do, but the reality is it's so hard to predict, what could happen next, and I think that's the most scary thing of all. So, yeah, I guess the hard part of it is, having to see how it plays out, but it's a good thing that we have, social media to, actively update us on what's going on so we actually get the real reality of what's going on and not just something that, I don't know, we're being told is happening.
Mm-hmm. Kevin?
Yeah, so I think to, Evelyn's point, it's really interesting to see a war on, social media. It's, because I think it adds, a different perspective. Normally, when we get news about war, it's through not a bias, but I guess you can say a staged perspective where they're very selective with what they can say and what they can't say. And there's obviously different inputs on, there's a story being told and obviously that carries different points of view as opposed to social media where we're seeing the actual thing happening in that moment. So it's in a way free from bias. And so I think it's just really interesting to have a unique perspective on something happening live right now, unfolding before our very eyes. And also back to the topic of the sanctions, I think like the Professor Dineri said in the article, it won't stop Russia from going to war, like that maybe war is inevitable, but how long the war lasts can be dictated by the severity of the sanctions.
I agree. And do you guys think that the U.S. has done enough so far? If anyone wants to add into that?
I almost think it's impossible to say, like, if we even can do enough. Like, obviously, we need to, like, support Ukraine as much as possible. But the reality is that Putin's, like, trigger happy, and we have the very scary reality of, like, nuclear war, and whether or not, like, it's an empty threat, like, if you help Ukraine, we'll nuke you. It's almost impossible to tell if it's a bluff or not, because we really don't know the state that Putin is in all reality. So I think that the U.S. should do more, but the reality is that I can really say as just, like, an individual, like, what more could possibly be at this point in time.
Yeah, would anyone else like to add to that?
Like Evelyn says, I don't think there can ever be enough done, right, in order to, like, justify the amount of lives that are being lost. But to the credit of the Ukrainians, they're really holding it down. They've become, like, a really impressive symbol of hope, where everybody, and literally everybody, no matter how little experience they have, are just ready to fight and aren't. Even their president, who a lot of people had doubts in, has really stood his ground and been at the front lines. And
yeah, they're fighting tooth and nail.
Yeah,
it's honestly really inspiring to see how, like, they're not going to let Russia, like, take their sovereignty. And it's really inspiring as well to see Zelensky, like, as, like, a leader, like, really rising to the occasion. And he's showing, like, leadership skills that I don't think we see in a lot of world leaders sometimes. Like, he's out there fighting with his people. So I'm definitely with Kevin. It's really inspiring and, like, really empowering that the Ukrainians are fighting so hard. And I really genuinely hope that they can fight back the Russians, because that is, like, they deserve their sovereignty, and they deserve to get, like, Putin's war out of their country and maintain, like, their, like, status as a country without Russian influence.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that no one really expected Ukraine to fight this hard, like, as long as they've lasted right now. And I think the latest thing that I heard was that they were starting to give weapons to the women and young teenagers. So it's just really intense just seeing how literally everyone in Ukraine, every civilian, like Kevin was saying, is getting involved to fight for their country, because it's the last thing that they have to hold on to right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And my last question is, Brenda, have you been seeing the racist treatment of refugees online, and what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's just really unfair, because these people, they're refugees. They're literally just trying to survive right now. And the fact that there's racism involved in this, it's like these people are just trying to make it out alive of this current situation that is so horrible, and that fortunately for people in the U.S., we don't have to go through right now. We're not in their shoes, but we should try to imagine ourselves and just think they're with their children, they're with their family and friends. They're just trying to live the last minutes of their lives and hopefully survive.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, like, the racist treatment of refugees is incredibly unfortunate, because it's essentially, like, people want to go to another country for a better life. So it's obviously, I mean, we don't know the situation of, like, all the refugees. I can understand people wanting to, like, their hearts are going out, like, oh, it's, there's a war going on, so of course they need to, like, go somewhere else. But the refugees who are from, like, North Africa or from, like, the Middle East who wanted to enter Ukraine, it's just really interesting how people, they're going through these, like, situations that are equally terrible, like the Middle East and the conflicts there and everything. People have been leaving Syria since, like, the 2010s, probably even earlier than that, but that's just when I remember, like, becoming aware of that. So it's definitely disheartening to hear that, people are, like, opening their doors to Ukrainians, which understandably so because of the situation with Russia, but it's really disheartening that they didn't do the same to people in similar situations just because of where they came from. And it's quite similar to, like, America, honestly. Like, we open our, like, doors to, like, refugees who are from predominantly, like, white countries, and yet at the same time we're like, if you're from Mexico or from, the Middle East, like, you get treated incredibly, like, in a very racist manner. I just think that it's understandable that, I guess, like, America sees Ukraine and they're like, middle class, have internet access, or widely middle class. I don't know the, like, social status of Ukrainians in general, but, we see, like, middle class, internet access, like, white skinned people, and like America as a whole, I can understand is like, oh, we should help them because we have these like underlying systemic like racist issues in our country that favor Ukrainians, I would argue, over like other people, which is again really disheartening. I hope that as this situation continues on, we can like remedy these issues or like at least point out how wrong they are. But for the time being, I think that there's so much going on that I think it's going to be difficult to tackle all these things at once.
Yeah. And then Kevin, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I think it's really incredible to see the rhetoric and the language being used when describing these refugees from Ukraine as opposed to refugees from other countries, like Evelyn said. It's very funny how apparent it is, and it's almost like these people saying it don't even notice. I think the Bulgarian Prime Minister was saying how he was surprised it was happening in Ukraine because these people are educated and civilized. And so it's just really interesting to see how sometimes they don't even notice that sort of implicit bias. I saw someone comment on a video saying how Russia's actions towards Ukrainians made him angry, and he realized that he didn't feel that same anger when he would see those same actions in like Middle Eastern countries, and he had to take a step back and realize it's sort of like implicit bias that he had within himself. So I think it's just interesting to see how like all of us react to a conflict like this, as opposed to this is nothing new in places like the Middle East or Latin America. And a side note, sometimes it's the US being that oligarch in these countries.
Definitely. And then next up in this issue, we have an article written by our news editor, Abhijit Rege, discussing parking on campus and some alternatives to help students. The article dives deep into the struggles students face when commuting to school and the disconnect students have with TAPS. The article also introduces the new app Pick Up and Park, which is a rideshare app free for students to use and find parking. Do you guys think that parking will be difficult with spring quarter most likely being in person? Do you think you'll be using this app in the future? If anyone would like that?
So I think parking is going to be very difficult, especially because the parking lot between Glenmore and Pentland and Dundee got taken away. It's not even being used, so there's less parking space now, and there's more students now than ever coming back, and everyone has a car. And UCR is a commuter school for the most part, which means a lot of cars, a lot of traffic, and parking really, TAPS seems to not care at all about the students, and they just care about receiving their fees. So it's pretty frustrating when you think about it, how they approach this whole topic.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with the passes and stuff and how limited the Gold Plus package is to get access to the new parking structure. And the new parking structure isn't even that close to campus. It's like a pretty far walk. So I definitely agree. I think it's going to be harder.
Yeah, I don't have a car currently, but I'm hoping to have one like towards the end of like this quarter, and just looking at like the parking pass fees and everything, just like in preparation of like eventually having like access to a vehicle, it's kind of crazy, honestly, because you're already paying like insurance for a car, you're already like paying tuition and everything. Like I can understand the necessity of like paying for a parking pass because there's already limited parking as it is, but I don't know. I see like we have this massive like area by North District that hasn't been used. I don't know if there's like a restriction on it or whatever, but I'm almost like, okay, well, what if we put like more parking there? Because the reality is, like Kevin was saying, like we are a commuter school. A lot of people like drive to get to campus, and we need to like take that into account. Like the school needs to start like thinking about, okay, well, we have all these people coming back in person. We need to start like really seriously thinking about like where are we going to have people, because you can't have people just like parking, all the way down in like University Village, and then that's the whole parking lot's filling up. It's basically like it's this major like it's gonna keep like growing and growing and growing as more people are like accepted and more people are driving and commuting. That I think TAPS really needs to like take the time to organize what's going on and maybe even make it like a little less expensive, like more affordable parking, and then more parking, I think, is like the main two issues that seem to be like at the forefront.
Definitely. Brenda?
Yeah, I have the campus apartments parking permit, and I'm not a huge fan of it because I think during the weekday you can park in certain blue lots, but until after 6 p.m. And I mean, I don't think a lot of students are at school after 6 p.m. unless they go to the library or they're eating out at the hub. but then on the weekend, you can park all day for free in certain blue lots. And again, there's barely anyone coming to campus on the weekends. And also going back to the Glenmore situation, my friend lives by Glenmore, and she's saying how there's been construction going on in the parking lot, and so many people because Glenmore shares the parking with other of the dorm structures. And a lot of the people who live in the dorms and in Glenmore, they're literally just fighting each other just to find a parking spot in, I think it's lot 30, I'm pretty sure. But they're literally just trying to find a parking spot anywhere, and even on the street, which is already hard to find. And the parking here is just a struggle. Fortunately, I mainly walk to campus since I live nearby. But like with parking here, I think it is going to be very limited in spring quarter, and it's just going to be more tough and rough for students to find available parking spaces. And I do think it's also interesting that we have the pickup now.
The pickup and park app, yeah.
Pickup and park app. I think that's interesting, and I think, sharing it, I want to share with other people who don't, who need a commute, because I think it is going to help students find a way to on campus.
Yeah, finding a parking spot, definitely. Because I think people were doing that before, where they would just go up to someone and say, hey, can I drive you to your parking spot? So I think this app kind of makes it more streamlined, so that students don't have to resort to, parking at a friend's house and walking all the way over, or, risk getting a ticket somewhere. Moving on, Winter Soulstice made a strong return this past Saturday, and here to discuss her article is Assistant Radar Editor Brenda Jovel. Brenda describes the night as a wonderful gathering full of singing and dancing, only citing a few concerns with organization in the first half. Brenda, how exactly was the process of actually getting a wristband and into the event?
So, in the beginning, I think in the morning they announced they would start giving out wristbands at 10 a.m. And people were already lining up, I think, 2 hours before just to get the wristband. And it was a lot. There was a lot of just waiting, and the huge line on, I think it was Pierce Lawn. It was just starting to form, and I was surprised that they kept giving out wristbands until 5 p.m. So I'm not sure if that's because they had more than they could. I mean, I think they... Wait, let me start. Sorry.
No, don't worry.
I think because they were giving out wristbands until 5 p.m., students weren't coming in, not many students were coming in to pick up wristbands, or they just had a lot more wristbands. So honestly, when I went into the venue, it looked around 600 people were there, which I think it didn't amount to the amount of people in Bonfire, because Bonfire was just wild. But I think in terms of the lines and getting into the venue for students, it was a bit disorganized in the beginning, because it seemed like members from ASPB were barely trying to figure out how to manage the lines, and it was just kind of a bit disorganized, and there needed to be a little more communication there.
Do you think the organization played a large role in how the night went, or did things eventually smoothen themselves out?
I think once people were getting into the venue, things were smoothed out, but in the beginning it was just a lot of waiting and just kind of seeing what ASPB members were going to tell students, because I don't know, I think they wanted to snake the line around, but then they ended up creating 5 individual lines to check in, which just seemed kind of disorganized in a way. But I do think once the students started getting into the gates, it started just feeling smoother in a way. So I think once people were getting into the venue, they were just trying to enjoy their time there.
Definitely. And then did the rest of the panel go to Winter Soulstice this year?
I wasn't able to, actually. I was out of town. But I heard mixed reviews. I heard a lot of people say they were really excited about seeing Thundercat, especially because I'm not in that music scene, but I hear he's a really well-known artist. And then I also heard just mixed reviews, I guess, in terms of the lines and everything, because some people were saying a lot of people were trying to cut in line or whatever. So at least for me, I'm a little bit bummed I missed it, because it's one of the first big events on campus in a really long time because of the pandemic. But I'm also kind of glad that I didn't, I guess, because it sounded like a lot of work to get through the lines and everything, and the wristband process.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to go, fortunately, and so I was up at 10 a.m. and I got in line, and I waited about an hour to get my wristband, which wasn't too bad. But I thought getting the wristband meant that it would be easier to get into the venue because it was just, here's my wristband, here's my ID, boom, let's go. And so I showed up at around 6:30. Doors were supposed to open at 6, and so I got there around 6:30, and I waited about another hour, and so I had to wait for a while just to get in again. And by the time I started moving, things were easier once inside the venue, but getting in there was like the hardest part. Overall, it was a really nice experience, but from a logistics perspective, it was a bit of a mess, just a little bit, just because I didn't get the whole point of the wristband if we were still going to wait in line afterwards. Another thing, they had a capacity of 2,500 people, and they gave out 3,000 wristbands, and the reason they gave 500 over is because they count on people not going, despite the fact that they have wristbands sometimes. So that's why it was a little bit of a mess too.
I see. But I mean, it sounded like the performances were worth it and they were good. So I'm glad to hear that. Hopefully for Spring Splash, the organization is a bit better. Finally, in our radar section for this issue, we have an article written by staff writer Elias Alvarez Herrera discussing Kanye West's newest 3-part documentary on Netflix called Jeen-yuhs. The article explains how the documentary shows a young Kanye West on the come-up of musical success as an MC in Chicago. The article also characterizes Ye as a multifaceted human being who has had to deal with mental health and fame all at the same time. Has any of you on the panel watched this documentary or are planning on it? And do you think this documentary will humanize Ye as an individual who is deeply troubled by mental illness?
I am planning on watching it, and I haven't gotten around to it, but I've seen some clips like on TikTok that show scenes from the show. I think the most impressive thing is the fact that he has all this footage. For years, it's just been other celebrities talk about their interactions with Kanye West, and you think sometimes, oh, maybe they're exaggerating a little bit. And to see all this footage that he has and the way he just was able to keep track of this, it's sort of like a video journal. And it's just really interesting to see. Maybe it won't gain a lot of empathy for himself, but it'll just show his journey. And I think that in a way is a way to relate to him and see that he is not just a musical genius people revere, although that's neither here nor there. It's just a way to see that, oh, he's just a normal guy going through the same stuff. He just happens to have multiple Grammys.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see just a more raw side of him, because I feel like in the media, whenever he's portrayed, he's mainly like a controversial figure in the celebrity world, and not a lot of people are fans of him because of that. And I think it'll just be interesting just to see a closer view on himself. And I didn't know that his mom's name is Donda. I hope I'm saying her name right.
Yeah.
But that's actually the newest name of his album that's coming out. And I think it's just interesting how he's like correlating the two and kind of honoring her memory because she did pass away. But yeah, I think I am going to watch it because I'm not a fan of him, but it'll be interesting just to see how he portrays himself and just seeing how he's been navigating his way through life and through media.
Yeah, I'm with Brenda. I don't listen to Kanye West either, but I watched this like 3-hour documentary that some like a YouTuber made on him, even though I don't listen to his music, just because he's such like an interesting person in the world of music. And like Brenda said, like he's relatively like controversial, but he's made like such amazing strides in the music industry. I will say though that it seems like an interesting time for this documentary to come out, especially since he's going through like the divorce from Kim Kardashian and everything. And how the situation with that is, like, really, I don't know, it seems kind of like an invasion of privacy in some ways. Like, Kanye is, like, I mean, I can definitely sympathize. Like, I can almost imagine, like, he's probably going through a really hard time because he's going through a divorce and, like, his ex-wife is so in the public eye and he's so in the public eye that it's definitely, I can imagine it's probably incredibly difficult for him. But I feel like, you know, some of the things that he's been saying, like, about his, like, daughter North and, like, about Kim and, like, Pete Davidson and everything, I guess it's, like, kind of an interesting time for this documentary that will humanize him kind of comes out. So I'm definitely planning on watching it, but I think I'll, like, kind of take it with a grain of salt because of everything like going down with like his divorce from Kim Kardashian and everything.
Yeah, and then lastly, does he deserve our sympathy considering his outburst online towards his children or family, considering his mental illness and stuff like that, or no?
I don't know if maybe deserves empathy is the right word for it, but at least we can understand where he's coming from. And I think being able to tell your own story from your perspective counts for a lot. Oftentimes when you're in the public eye, you don't get to explain yourself, and so everyone is sort of jumping to conclusions on what they see, even though they don't have the whole story. And so maybe not empathy, but we'll understand where he's coming from now, and I think that counts for a lot. Sometimes maybe you don't need to be empathized with, but just to see where you're coming from, even if like we disagree.
Yeah, like getting both sides of the story. Yeah.
Definitely. That's all for our newsroom episode today. If you'd like to learn more about the topics covered today, read the articles on our website, highlandernews.org, and catch us on Instagram at the Highlander UCR. Thank you for listening in, and we'll catch you next week.